Bob was probably what would be referred to as a business lawyer. But I considered, and I think most of us, or many of us, considered Bob to be a lawyer's lawyer. That is, whatever problem you or your client may be confronting, you could seek Bob's counsel. After I became managing partner of the firm, and Bob essentially retired, although he would still come around, he became even more of a mentor to me because he had been managing partner also, and he would phone me every so often, every other week or so, to sort of say, Wilbur, how are things going? You know, you have any problem? Anything I can do to help you? And so it was a very nice relationship at that point. I remember very distinctly that he said to me, practicing law at this law firm, Young Clement, it was very important for the firm to be a part of the Charleston community. That law practice was much more than litigating cases and showing up in court and otherwise working with clients, that it was also especially important to be engaged with the community, and I've never forgotten that. So Bob was great at helping you organize your thinking about a matter, and you know, to some degree, coherent thinking about a problem is as important as almost anything else. And so that's probably my my enduring memory of Bob and the contributions that he made, that I think he was able to make to all of us who were able to practice with him and knew him at this law firm.
He was incredibly driven, very, very, very focused. As you know and have seen, he had a lot of training and education, very classically trained in a lot of the engineering aspects, which I think ultimately led him into law school and ultimately practicing constructive defect litigation and fraud misrepresentation. He took every client and really made them almost like a friend or a family member, really very hands-on, I mean, regularly at their homes. For instance, one client was unable to leave her home because her husband was in critical condition and needed round-the-clock care, and she just went on and on about how kind he had been and how he had always done every meeting at their home. So he really did care for his clients as people and did everything he could to make sure that they got everything they needed and everything he could give them. But for him, I don't think I would have had the courage to make the jump from government, which is where I worked in California prior to moving here, into just going right into private practice, hanging our own shingle. He just was really, really confident in his ability that if he didn't know something, he could figure it out. He could find the answer, and really that it's not about knowing everything, it's about being able to find the answer. So it allowed me to really trust myself and trust him and go into private practice and then continue on in private practice. In a professional aspect, the thing that I'm going to remember most about him is absolutely his ambition.
I started working with Richard. I knew nothing, like every new lawyer. I mean, we all, that's the thing that we never tell anybody, is that when we start practicing, we really don't know the first thing about how to practice law. And I was very fortunate to have Richard as an early mentor. Richard immediately sort of threw me out and said, here, here's some small wreck cases, some slip and fall cases, get in the courtroom and try them. And that's the thing that I would say about Richard. We have a lot of litigators in the profession now, but very few trial lawyers. Richard was a trial lawyer. Richard, was a highly decorated athlete at the Citadel. on the football team there, and he's in the Citadel Hall of Fame for his football career.
As a child, there's nothing that I liked better than getting picked for a team. We all feel that way. We feel that way all through our lives. And I was picked for some good teams, and I was lucky to have been picked for some good teams.
He was a very competitive person, but despite the fact that he was that competitive, he never lost sight of the fact that there was a right way and a wrong way to do things. And so Richard was not a win-at-all-costs guy. Richard was a guy that would do everything that he could to try to help his client further their cause, but his character was so much more important to him. Right after Richard died, I was talking with Jeff Girardi, who's another lawyer in my firm, but also was a good friend of Richard's. And I thought Jeff had a great analogy. He said, whenever I would talk with Richard about the types of cases we were handling, I always felt like that Richard was playing chess and I was playing checkers, because he really did practice at just a level that very few of us ever achieve. The amazing thing to me is that as great of a lawyer as Richard was, and he was so well respected by not only his colleagues that practiced with him, but also other lawyers that had cases against him, which I think says a lot about the type of person he was.
Judge Houck is the second longest serving judge in the District of South Carolina's history. And when he came on, he was nominated with Judge Hawkins and Judge Perry. And Judge Houck is the only one who drew any opposition. And the reason was he was such a tough advocate as a defense lawyer that some of the plaintiffs' lawyers were concerned that he couldn't be fair to the plaintiffs in court. And they said he was too tough. And his response to that, which I always thought was great, he said, "I came out of law school trying cases against Spots Mozingo in Darlington. If you weren't tough, he'd run you out the courtroom." And that's the way he approached the practice of law. And he was always very even-handed and always very fair. He was a brilliant jurist. He was always very well prepared. And he did not suffer fools easily. If you went before him, you'd better be prepared, and you better be a strong advocate for your client. The case that defined Judge Houck was undoubtedly the Shannon Faulkner case. It was the most high-profile case of its time, spawned great emotions on both sides, and he was handed a single litigant seeking admission, not a class action. It made it much more difficult for him. He made the correct call. I think that's his legacy. That was the case of the time. I think what he taught me was that judges respect lawyers who are not afraid to stand before the court and be a strong advocate and be sure that your client gets his full day in court. It's not the judge's courtroom, it's the litigant's courtroom. He was a great jurist and a great man, and we will miss him.
Ginny began teaching at the Charleston School of Law in 2010 after being in private practice for about 12 years. And Ginny was a wonderful teacher, and she had such a passion for teaching and for her students. When Reverend St. Francis contacted me about starting a legal clinic at the Cancer Center, because I'm the pro bono director at the Charleston School of Law, I immediately thought of Ginny. It was ironic because when we began the project with the Cancer Center, Ginny was healthy and she had no idea that she would eventually develop breast cancer. She would schedule her treatments at the Cancer Center to coincide at times with meeting patients individually for follow-up appointments outside of the clinic hours if something came up and someone needed some help or they couldn't come to the regularly scheduled clinic. Ginny taught me the importance of humor, and even when she was sick, she had the ability to find the humor in situations. She also taught me about reaching outside of yourself even when you're faced with the greatest challenges, Jenny loved deeply. And she cared about her coworkers and her friends and her family, and she especially, above all, loved her children. And her main concern when she was fighting her illness was to make sure that her children would be okay. Her partners at the law firm where she worked before she became a professor said that she was the type of person and attorney we should all aspire to be. She went above and beyond to help her clients, and she was an example for all of us, both as an attorney and as a person.
Ben was the consummate Southern gentleman. He was a member of virtually all of the downtown clubs, all of which he enjoyed and actively participated in. And he was an outstanding lawyer in every respect. Well respected, not only by the bar generally, but by the judiciary. And I want to share the story of Ben's sailing across the Atlantic Ocean in a sailboat with one of his dear friends, Will Middleton, about 25 years ago. And they had planned this trip for a long, long time. We had talked internally in the firm about a sabbatical program, and nobody was prepared to really make a decision about it until one day Ben came in and said, I'm going to make this sail across the Atlantic Ocean, and it's going to take several months to prepare for and to accomplish. As far as I'm concerned, this is the start of the law firm's sabbatical program. And after that, the firm embraced the program, and we began the program within a year or so of Ben's successful crossing of the Atlantic, and we attribute our sabbatical program to Ben. It's difficult to put into words the legacy of someone who has been as active in the profession and in their lives as Ben was. I think part of Ben's legacy lies in the high esteem in which he was held by the fellow members of the bar that he associated with, by the judiciary that he appeared before, and particularly by the partners who were privileged to practice with him.
Bo was the perfect attorney for a client coming in who had an injury and who was, not at ease with the case, because most people aren't comfortable in the courtroom. And Bo just had a way of making you relax. He had a style about him and a personality about him that when people came, no matter how nervous they were, he could get the best from them because they calmed down when they spoke with Bo. He had the knack of just drawing from his people, his witnesses, their best testimony and have them not sound scared, nervous, or upset. Oh, we took a lot of trips together. Like, Bo was always one. We knew if we had to go somewhere, he would line up what's happening there, and then we would go at that particular time of year. I mean, we had to go to Florida to take some people's depositions who were doctors. Well, Bo didn't want to go to Florida when it was just hot Florida. So he went when the baseball teams were down in Florida for spring training. And so we could take in the spring training games and still go take the doctor's depositions. And his daddy was mayor and when he started practicing law. So he had a built-in clientele in Charleston because everybody knew the mayor. And they knew his son was practicing law, so the Morrison & Morrison firm, he would tell me stories about how he'd have them lined up around the block after a big accident because all the police would say, if you need a good lawyer, you go to see Mr. Morrison. He was truly a family man. He worshiped his family. He gave parties for people, like when Fritz ran for the Senate, or when Fritz ran to be president of the United States. Bo was his campaign manager, as treasurer, and he would call around and raise more money, but he had the knack to talk people into giving this money because everybody liked him. I learned in my 33 years of working with him that if you watched how he handled each individual and how he spoke to each individual, you could pick up a lot about people and their their manner of reacting to him.
About 3 years ago, I started sharing office space over here with him at Legree here in Smith, and we would, I'd go get advice from him, and he had a very, very keen sense of humor. He's always telling stories, very, very entertaining in that way. He'd gotten practicing law down to a science, and he had a great memory both for legal issues and legal pleadings, and also for stories about people and things that happened. What I would say about him is he had this kind of presence, which is the same kind of presence as his father had and his son has, which is just a very calm, confident, cheerful presence. And that's probably most characteristic you would remember most when you met him. He could listen to what his clients told him, get their point of view and their story, get that down very, very easily. I think I'm gonna, of course, miss consulting with him, miss going down the hall, getting advice about different kind of cases from him. And then we had I missed the social part of it, missed the friendship that I had with him, the relationship I had with him.
During Bachman's career, he was, as far as an attorney's concerned, he wore a number of hats. You know, he started out as a litigator, trying cases and doing litigation work, and then he, before my time, recreated himself to become a business lawyer and doing real estate and some corporate, that sort of work, which really, I think, benefited him for his third sort of hat in his career, which was mediator. With his litigation and business background, there wasn't a case that he couldn't mediate. He had the very deep voice, very deep voice. In fact, it's hard to tell stories about Bachman without getting into character. You want to speak like him, but he very deep voice, Charleston accent to the T. But I think as a mediator, with all that knowledge and all that civility and honesty, and then with that voice, I mean, he would get people in the room, and you were going to settle the case. When Bachman said, "This is what you're going to do," they said, "Yes, sir." If I had to choose one word that embodies Bachman and believes the sort of something he taught me, was family. Family was first to him. His family, his wife Ann, and his 2 sons and daughter, and extended family. But then there was his HSB family, his Haynesworth St. Boyd family. If I had to pick another one, it'd just be integrity. Bachman always did the right thing. Before he passed away, we were fortunate enough to show him the Bachman S. Smith III Mediation Center that we opened in his honor. We have a number of lawyers that focus their practices on mediation, and they have it, and there's mediations in there every day. And we think about him every day when we see that.
Gaines always identified himself as a lawyer to whomever he was talking to. He was very proud of what he did. Gaines had been practicing in Charleston since 1950. He was one of, if not the, last individual in Charleston County who took the bar without ever having gone to law school. So he was a World War II veteran. When he got back from World War II, he got a job in the federal clerk's office, working as a federal clerk, studied law, and took the bar exam and passed in 1950. It's hard to come up with one story in regard to him. Instead, I think a great way to tell you the kind of lawyer he was is the reception I have received from the bar when they find out I'm his grandson. I have never heard a bad word uttered about him as an attorney. Every single person I've talked to, and this is unqualified, every single person I've talked to has told me how much they enjoyed working with my grandfather, how much they respected him, and how lucky and fortunate I was to be in this office with him. So I think that's a great testament to the kind of lawyer he was and his success if all of his colleagues had nothing but good things to say about him. The most important thing that he taught me about being a lawyer is that we're all in this together. He said, remember, when you're done with that case, that judge and the other lawyers will get out of that courtroom and go eat lunch just like you are. We have to remain civil with each other, and we have to maintain relationships with each other, and to remember that the person in that robe or the person on the other counsel's table is a person just like you are. Every day I think of him and I try to think of what he would do and how he would react to situations, and I hope that more often than not I live up to that.